Hey guys, 7K is here once again. There was something that I was discussing with my husband that really made a lot of sense. That I really, we kind of felt it was a little important to talk about. And it has to do with cluster B personalities, psychopaths, narcissists, borderlines, and empathy circuits built into the brain. So every creature has empathy circuits. They're neurons. They're just neurons. They're throughout the whole body and the brain. And we know this from scientific testing because we've had several individuals put EKGs on trees. And then all these trees are in separate pots. They don't have connected roots and they're not even close to each other, but they are in the same room. They're all in a circle. And they light one of those trees' leaves on fire. Just one leaf on one tree in the middle of the room. And all the other trees pick up on the signal. They show an EKG spike, which means that without eyes and ears and without having connected nerves, roots underground, they're still able to pick up that damage is being done or something is affecting another living being close to them. They don't have eyes to see or ears to hear, and they can still feel it. They can pick up on it. This is also recorded with water. Dr. Emoto's lessons, his studies of speaking into water or speaking into water in rice and growing it and saying gratitude or saying hurtful, hateful, destructive things, and then also neglecting them as a baseline and see how it performs. Well, anybody who has looked that up already has seen that the water that you showed gratitude to froze in crystals that were beautiful. The rice that you spoke gratitude to turned into rice wine. It fermented. But the items that you spoke poorly to, and we know this with plants, we can see it, the items that you spoke poorly to rotted. They rotted. And the water that they spoke poorly to, it froze in like striations that were very ugly patterns that were not geometrically sound. They weren't pretty at all. They were chaotic, like the grass I'm looking at here. And so we know empathy circuits are built into every neuron that is firing within every life form that has them. Maybe even the ones that are plasmonic that don't have neurons. We don't know how that works. No idea. But we were talking about the brain needing chemicals. The brain needs to get high on something. So we naturally produce our own ghrelin, which is a stress hormone that makes you gain weight for survival. It happens when you've been through situations that are like life and death. You start producing ghrelin and you start gaining weight. It's also the same thing. It suppresses your appetite. You also produce cortisol as well, and that will cause the same issue. You produce dopamine, natural cannabinoids, natural opiates. These are things that are naturally produced by the body. And when you take external supplements, your body is confused and doesn't know how to produce its own. That's already built into it. I know a lot of potheads that wind up going, oh, the body's got a built-in cannabinoid system. It's built in so that you can use weed. Yes, I understand that. It's the brain's way of being able to process that. However, every naturally occurring hormone and chemical is always the purest source. Otherwise, why do you think they'd be looking for adrenochrome the way that they are? It's the purest source coming from a natural body and not from some synthetic thing they created in a laboratory. Or even cannabis that's grown on its own, or opiates that you get from poppies. Everybody knows when you start to, well, not everybody, let me correct that. When you start to introduce external sources of this drug, especially over and over and over again, and not just like one ceremonial thing in a group, guess what? Your body no longer knows how to produce its own and when to produce its own situationally. It releases its own chemicals depending on what you're going through, what you're enduring, and what it needs you to do, like when you go into shock, or when you've endured trauma, or when you have a really exciting moment. Like autistics getting flooded with dopamine and overexcited and too many charges and can't control themselves. So about these circuits, everything that you experience and you do and you witness, you start to build connections in your brain between one neuron to another neuron. You build a little snake, a little pathway, a little electrical cord that's got a synapsis, and it's a synapsis that's got dendrites on the end of it that are supposed to connect to other synapses that are attached to other neurons to trade information, bioelectrochemical information. This is how God built the brain. It's very interesting. And when people, especially when you're really little, this is how they make like super soldiers. They get them when they're really, really young, like the Hitler Youth. Indoctrination is best, especially before 3. So that's the easiest way to break a person, but you could really do it at any age. It's just the younger, the easier, because their minds are molding and they learn the patterns in the process, and then that's what they learn is normal and they start to repeat it. So the brain is forming new neurons all the time, especially as you're young. And you're forming new connections between each new neuron all the time. And people got to get high on something, on some chemical. And when they're not getting rewarded for, I mean, this is how they create super soldiers, MK Ultra. This is also what they did to us in GATE class. They wouldn't tell us what our grades were. So we would do all of these performances and all these little tests, and then they would never tell us how we did. They just move us to where they thought according to their numbers, but then they never told us the numbers or why. Actually, when you do that to people, you give them a problem, they solve it, and then they don't get the reward of they don't get the dopamine of solving that problem, and you give them a new problem, they're going to keep trying to solve the problem, keep trying to prove themselves, and keep trying to get more dopamine. They're just chasing dopamine and they can't catch it. So when adults or parents or institution members wind up grooming, especially little kids, to be a certain way, to be psychopathic, they'll do specific things, and the kid will be like, look, pay attention to me, look at the great thing that I just did, or I just made, or just experienced for the first time, and I want to know your reaction to it. When you as an adult don't reward and acknowledge the new connection that person is making, a positive connection, you actually usually punish it by telling the person, you're annoying me, you're in my way, yeah, haha, that's cool, but not really actually actively listening and paying attention. The individual starts to learn that they're not being rewarded for things that are good, godly, or holy, things that are creative or productive. But then they see these people abuse other people and get high off of it and feel good about it. And then on top of it, if they're not getting the dopamine, they start to mimic that abusive behavior. They start to push other kids, be mean to other kids, kill animals even, torture other people. Like the things that are being done to them are the things they're watching older people do to other people. And then they start repeating that, and then before you know it, they're being flooded with adrenaline and cortisol and serotonin as a coping mechanism, and they're getting high on their own chemicals of strain, the chemicals of stress. They're getting high on that, and then the brain starts to recognize the stress chemicals, starts to recognize, this is making me feel better in an otherwise hopeless situation. This is giving me control where I have no control. So they start seeking stress. This is why kids start rebelling when they're not getting the acknowledgement that they need for positive growth. They're only being noticed if they do something wrong. That's why they start acting out. They start breaking things. Because they don't get attention from the parent for doing something good. They get attention from the church or from the parent or from the institution for doing something bad. So it's, in a sense, they're being rewarded by being put out in the hall. They're being rewarded by getting yelled at, because it's better than no attention at all. It's just like bad press is better than no press, right? Because you're being noticed. And so you start to get high off of this. And the normal way of being a human being, the normal way when you grow up in a normal setting, in a stable setting, the normal way is to have enough empathy circuits that you start to feel other people's feelings. You feel their pain, and you don't want them to feel that way, and you start searching for a way to try and help them. Unfortunately, we have too much people pleasing because of abuse, but there is still something to that, to bringing care to people that don't have any at the moment, bringing comfort to those who cannot find it. That is holy in the eyes of God. That is love. That is what God is. And that's the normal way of functioning, because we are of God. We are children of Jesus. We are his children. And when we first come here, coming from heaven, that's what we know. That is what we know. We know our Father. And we start to see behavior like this from adults, and we get scared. We're like, why? This ain't normal. But before you know it, after 3 years, it starts to get solidified, and then you have until about 7, they tell you through psychology, you have until about 7 to correct whatever you messed up in the first 3 years of their life. Otherwise, because the longest living cell in your body is your liver cell, and it lives for 7 years. After that, you have new cells, and you are a new creature, reborn. So after that point, it's a lot harder, because everything that's been in them has been ingrained for 7 years in that liver cell, in that stress cell. Where does cortisol produce? The liver. So you got to be real careful with those first 7 years, especially the first 3. And when those kids grow up, they start growing up and realizing that they can't get high off of that dopamine of positivity, because they're punished for it. They're not rewarded, they're punished for it. And then they start doing these things that get them high on adrenaline instead. And they got to get high on something. And before you know it, they're continuing to do this over and over again. And every time they do this, every time that you see someone in pain and you walk away and don't do anything to help, or you do something to hurt someone, and there's no repercussions of anything, and even if there are, maybe they're abusive repercussions. So basically the demon's just getting rewarded because you did something wrong, and now you're being punished physically for it or violently for it, and now they're getting even more high off of everything, putting fuel on the fire. And the more that you witness stuff like that and don't do the right thing, the more you start dissociating from God, the more you start dissociating from yourself and your own connection, your own higher self. You stop having empathy for people. You stop caring about people. You start seeing people in pain, and then you actually wish that they stay in pain, or you laugh at them. And then other people that are getting joy or spreading joy to other people, you feel uncomfortable. You actually feel offended, because you're like, why isn't that me? Why can't that be me? And so you start trying to do something to get high again, because you feel sick about yourself. So you try to do something, adrenaline, to go take some guy out. And now I feel good about myself again. It's what a lot of cops do. Endless cycles of dopamine chasing over and over again. And that's how we get to this point. That's how we get to a society where people have become so disconnected from themselves and disconnected from God, their source, to where they don't want to feel, because seeing someone in pain, seeing someone cry or getting abused in a store is bringing them straight back to where they were, straight back to their inner child, straight back to trauma, to damage. And before you know it, I think it's Nietzsche that says you spend so much time fighting monsters that you got to be careful not to become one, equally yoked, hanging out with people like that. People start laughing at someone for something they did that was actually amazing and beautiful, but it was like Step Brothers, and he's standing there singing, oh, and everybody looks at him like, that guy looks like a freak. And everybody starts laughing, like watching Jackass, watching people get hurt, and everybody gets high on it. And then you start laughing too, because you want to be part of the group. You want to have connection. You want to have social connection. That's human nature. And before you know it, you have entire societies laughing in people's faces at their pain, instead of trying to help other people. And on top of it, quite often trying to cover it up too, because it's usually a family dynamic or an institutional dynamic or a work dynamic, and they don't want to change it. It's too hard to start fresh and fix it all from scratch, retrain everybody, get new managers and all that, than it is to just get rid of the one person that's pointing out the problem. But that's the whole point. The whole lesson is don't give in. Keep standing. Keep standing for justice. You don't have to go exposing everybody like instantaneously. He did this, she did this, it hurt my feelings. You don't have to do that. God's gonna handle it, but you have to give it to God. You can't just sit on it and let it eat you alive, and then before you know it, you start acting on it in your anger because you're mad. Because no one else was there for you when you went through this, so why the hell should you be there for anybody else? Excuse my language. I apologize for that. That's how we got here. That's how we got into this situation. So the more you expose yourself to that, like watching horror movies all the time, watching people get murdered all the time. I grew up with stop horror films all the time. Everybody in my family except my dad, he didn't really care about any of this, but my mom, my siblings, a lot of the other kids in the neighborhood completely obsessed. We were all goths. We were obsessed with Dracula, all sorts of violent stuff. I didn't like the violence, but it's what I was surrounded by. And all these people start emanating it and acting on it and not knowing any better, because that's what we were told to go sit down in front of the tube and go watch. But now we know better, right? That's my point, is if you don't know better, ignorance is bliss. You accidentally commit a murder you didn't even know anything about. It even says in the Bible that can be forgiven. But once you realize what you're doing, once the wool has been pulled over your eyes, the light has shined on what is going on, and you actually know what's going on, and you continue to participate in it, then you are guilty. So that's why it's very important for us to keep standing. And if we see people doing this to each other, don't just walk away. Don't tolerate it. Don't tolerate it. Put your foot down. Be graceful. Be loving, like Jesus. But don't tolerate it. And if they can't learn, they can't move past it, I think Jesus said, tell them twice. Speak your piece twice. And if they don't hear you past that and they don't believe you past that, pray for them and move on. Remove yourself. Separate yourself and go somewhere else that God is calling you to go to minister. I wish you guys luck. I gotta go. Lunchtime. Bye.